guys, back in 2010, Robert Shrewsberry wrote me a letter telling me about an incredible find that a man he knew found on Mount Trumbull. It was a cavern with 27 giants in it, and also had a vast amount of precious stones and artifacts in it. In this letter that Robert wrote me, he tried to conceal the true name of this location where this find was and the name of the finder. He called it Mount Nimble, but really the true name is Mount Trumble, and he also calls the name of the finder John Doe. Well, the name of the finder is and I found out and knew about this because I'd had contacts with other people. I didn't know personally, but I knew people who did and who helped him out, and I'll talk about that throughout this video. Some of the insights of some of the things I know about this find.
Letter from Robert Shrewsberry, January 15th, 2010. The Mount Nimble site was first discovered by a fellow by the name of John Doe. He was an adamant hiker and spent considerable time at it. He was exploring the Nimble area before it had become a national forest and came upon a volcanic blowhole and ventured inside of it to find 27 well-preserved red-headed giants with various artifacts, including some gold medallions or large coins with images on them that looked like Egyptian. Now I know this area fairly well. It sets very close to the Grand Canyon and only down a little ways from the mysterious area that was excavated by the Smithsonian Institute back in 1908 and closed for reasons undisclosed. This area also ties into the local Amerindian oral history of an 8 to 9 foot red-headed giant that lived by them all of their lives. And finally, when he was old, he told the Paiutes that it was time for him to go to his grave and was seen by them traveling over to the Mount Nimble area to never be seen again. The last time the Paiutes saw the giant alive was in 1910. The old Paiute sheep herder when I knew him was way old then, but he had spent most of his life as a herdsman, whether it was sheep or cattle, and most of the local ranchers know or knew him well. For one, he was the best cowboy they ever had according to their memories. He was a wealth of knowledge, and I spent lots of time conversing with him. Usually he would be hitchhiking to another town, and I would give him a ride because we both lived on the reservation and only a small distance apart and a few hundred feet from where my mother was born. He told me about 3 different giant burials that he saw while out herding and covered them up, so the white man would not disturb them.
Now that's not the only thing that's been found out there. There's been a lot of other things, but here's a email I got from a guy in 2000 describing what he found in this area. It says, "Dear Terry, I really like your website. Back in the early 90s, I think it was the early 90s, I got a thing called Web TV, and I learned how to do HTML program with it so I could get on the internet with my TV, and I built a treasure hunting website at the time, and it was called the Treasure Hunter's Hideout." So anyways, it says, "I really liked your website. I recently finished the book, The Gold of Kerry Chenab. I am a native to southern Utah and find the history interesting. I also viewed the photos of the petroglyphs you showed on your site. About 2 weeks ago, my brother was out treasure hunting and came upon a cave that was level with the ground. Inside the cave, he found 3 dead horses that looked to be mummified. There was also some markings on the walls. I am going to go with him and take some photos of the markings. He said he remembers some looking like, and then he shows these arrows and T's. I'm not sure in what order or how they appeared. There are 2 caverns. One is about 6 foot high and 60 feet deep. The second level is about 8 foot lower, and my brother has not explored it yet, other than seeing the horses in it. I asked him if the cavern was man-made, and he said no, it looked natural. I guess that's why I'm emailing you. Do you have any clues or insights on our find? It's located somewhere near southern Utah, northern Arizona. I realize that you will need more information to make any observation. I intend to visit this cave myself in the near future. I will inform you of our find and email photos to you for your observation. Once again, I really enjoy your site. Thanks, Clayton." So hey, Clayton never got back with me, so I got back with him a couple years later to see what had happened, and he just told me that this wasn't meant to be disturbed and he wasn't going to share the location or take anybody to it, and that it was sacred, and I don't blame him. I probably would have done the same thing. But there's been other stories told out there where the people had found something, but they had visitors come and tell them that if they valued their life, not to ever show back up again, and it's frightened most of these people so bad that they didn't.
John Doe ran an article in the newspaper in southern Utah about his find and was seeking permission from BLM to do a movie on the discovery. Apparently, he could not get permission and finally did what he very well should not have done, and that was to con some unsuspecting folks out of some money, and when their cash flow ran out, he started to sell some of these gold medallions to pawn shops all the way from the Las Vegas, Nevada area to Flagstaff, Arizona.
Back in the 90s, I met Steve Malner, who was the publisher and editor of The Lost Gold of the Uintas, the rest of the storybook. That was the last book that came out by Gail Rhodes. He was writing it, and then he passed away, so Steve Malner finished it and published it for Gail Rhodes and the family, the Rhodes family. Well, Steve Malner told me that he was helping fund. Now, he didn't tell me that he felt like he was conned out any money or not, and he never said anything about, and I never heard anything about actually going out and selling artifacts. But he did tell me he seemed pretty spooked, as well as some other people told me that he seemed pretty spooked. I also met a guy that funded him some money or bought him some metal detectors, and this guy contacted me because he wanted to know if I could track down, if I knew him, and if I could track him down. But I didn't know. Last he'd heard he'd gone to Mexico, so who knows?
A good friend of mine was working with and his cave down there on Trumbull Mountain.
Uh-huh. So that must have been old Steve Malner, yeah.
In fact, Steve and I made, I don't know, half a dozen trips down to Trumbull with that.
I know Steve told me.
I don't know that he's smart enough to make up a lie and keep it straight 2 times in a row.
Uh-huh.
I could be wrong, but it seemed to me he was absolutely petrified of what's there.
Uh-huh.
Wanted to be rid of it.
Uh-huh.
Spooky as can be.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the guy was jumpy and looking around all the time, looking behind him all the time.
Really?
But after a season or two of messing with him, I mean, we did find some, with this Zona Jackson lady I told you about, we found an old temple. It has to be a temple religious site down near Mount Trumbull that no white man had ever been to because of, it was obvious because of all of the artifacts.
Really?
Right there on the ground. The foundation walls of his building were all still in place.
Really?
Yeah, and a big sacrificial altar and things. I've got photos of it from when we were down there years ago. We had an archaeologist involved, and we thought we were doing that, and we were digging the Parowan Gap site and doing all the archaeological work, legally and legitimately.
Right.
Hired archaeologists a whole bit.
The story I got was that John Doe made his last trip to the Mount Nimble area for another load of sellable artifacts, and the law was waiting for him this time, but he was apparently a good wheelman and outrun them in a high-speed chase where he destroyed 2 of their 4 vehicles. According to some of his relations, John is now in South America, far away from the reach of the law. At present, I do not know where any of the artifacts he sold are, and I don't think any of the owners will own up to having them either. But it sure would be interesting to see.
Now, when was trying to get in there legally through the BLM, he showed him some photos of some petroglyphs and petrographs. It was pretty cool looking. And the authorities looked at it and says, "Man, you're lying. That ain't from here. That looks like something that came from Australia." And they did, man. They looked like they was aboriginally, but they was pretty colorful and they was pretty cool looking. So took them in there and showed them it, and they was flabbergasted. They was astounded. And so what turned out next was the archaeologists that the BLM sent in there took credit for the find of it, and that kind of pissed him off. So he put out for just one day on a blog on a website where the location of these were, and then immediately hurried up and took it down. I got a copy of that when he put it up there, and I've got it in my paper somewhere. I looked for it to do this video, but I haven't been able to find it yet. It's somewhere in all my stuff.
There are several witnesses that saw some of the medallions and some other artifacts, like some discs with writing on them. In the same area, an acquaintance of mine found a Spanish gold treasure and took it some 30 years ago, and I did see some of his artifacts, but I am abiding by professional courtesy and protocol not to reveal his name. When the early Mormon settlers came to the area, they found a frozen man in a volcanic lava tube within just 2 to 3 miles from the site where John Doe found his mummies well preserved in a frozen lava tube. I am aware that sometimes in volcanism there can be anomalies where the ground can stay frozen year-round. Unfortunately, the frozen man thawed out when a person removed some of the material in the tube that changed the airflow, and he decomposed rapidly. There is some privately owned land in this area, with lava tubes, and some of it can be explored. But the main find is on national forest land. I may be willing to locate this find since John Doe is not disposed to help and may be on the lam, but I would do so with the utmost caution because I certainly do not want to take the rap for any archaeological or ancient antiquities laws that have been broken. Sincerely, Robert.